Everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is JGOD. In today's video, we're going to take a look at the MP7, and this is a series that I've been doing for a few of the different weapons. I started with the MP5, the M4, the Growl, and now I'm doing the MP7, which was highly requested. The next one I'll probably do once this video gets to 2,000 likes. Hopefully we hit that number. You guys have been absolutely destroying it. I'm going to go ahead and start working on the M13 video, which seems to be the most popular one, and then maybe the RAM after that. Really just depends on what you guys comment down below. If you are looking to find your way back for whatever reason, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. So the overall goal of today's video is to give you a little bit of insight of the different attachments and how they work so you could better make a creative class for yourself. So whatever the loadout you want to go with, at least you're making an informed decision based off recoil, pros and cons, all the different variables that go into it, so you can make a best class setup that fits your individual needs and not just copy mine or another YouTuber's. So you should have the tools you need to make your own creative class, regardless if it's just Modern Warfare multiplayer or Warzone. So the first thing we'll go ahead and talk about is the muzzle. And normally the best recoil attachments on the muzzle are going to be the muzzle brake and the compensator in combination with an underbarrel. But since this is primarily a Warzone video, we're going to focus on having the monolithic suppressor, which we've already talked about a little bit. You get a 7.5 increase to your range with about 1 to 2 frames slower aim down sight time. It kind of just depends on the weapon. There's a little bit of frame rounding. For this one, it's closer to 1 frame. So it's just as good as the tactical suppressor, which is going to slow you down by 1 frame as well. But you're going to get that 7.5 meter range buff, which is mostly negligible, but you might as well have it because it's better than 0. So a lot of times people ask, well, how do you get all this information? Because the stat bars don't go through all of that. And it is a very tedious process that we typically do right when the game launches for all the individual weapons. So this is an example of a Growl side by side, checking the individual aim down sight time. And normally this is the information you'd gather right at the beginning, plot it into a spreadsheet, and then you'd have it for the weapons. And then when the weapons receive a buff or a nerf, you go ahead and double check that and make the adjustments in your chart so you have the accurate information. For the most part, these values really haven't changed as far as aim down sight speed and individual range differences. So as you can see, what we're going to do is look at the first frame, look at when it's fully ADS for one of the weapons, which will get a base, which it ends up being for the MP7 is 200 milliseconds, which is actually pretty fast. I think it's pretty much fastest in the SMG category off the top of my head. And then as we go through, you're going to look at the various attachments and see how much they speed it up or slow it down, and then you kind of figure out whether that's 1 frame at 60 FPS and how many milliseconds that ends up being, which is right around 16 to 17 milliseconds. So what we're going to look at in today's video is these individual attachments, and then I'll explain the specific recoil patterns and also how you can get different iron sights, because that's probably one of the most common questions I get when I actually use an MP7 class up. They're like, why do your iron sights look different? So we'll talk a little bit about how to change your iron sights for this individual weapon. So the first barrel we'll take a look at is the FSS Strike barrel, and this one's going to give you a 20% range increase in addition to the bullet velocity. So a lot of times those stack together, and the bullet velocity part of it, in addition to helping out with a little bit on the range, it also makes it so that your bullets connect a little bit faster, which is always a good thing because the bullet drop in this game can be pretty significant, especially on smaller caliber weapons like an SMG. The only penalty there is the aim down sight speed of 1 frame. So it'll be 1 frame slower than the base weapon, so that'll increase it from 200 milliseconds up to 216 milliseconds just by equipping this one attachment without any of the other attachments equipped in place. Next one is the FSS Recon. This is going to give us a 30% range increase, but on top of that, we get a little bit of recoil control, which you'll see from the recoil patterns that this does end up making a difference. As far as the aim down sight speed, it's a 2 frame penalty, so it's 1 frame slower than the strike barrel. So if you end up feeling like, hey, you know what, maybe I want a little bit more snappy aim, you could always go with the strike at the penalty of having a little bit less recoil control, which it ends up being noticeable between the 2 barrels. And then the FSS SWAT's only going to help with 1 frame ADS speed, but at the penalty of bullet velocity, which is also a decrease in range. So it's probably almost never worth it to use the FSS SWAT unless maybe you're playing hardcore and you want a little bit more snappy aim. Underbarrels we'll be taking a look at today are the Commando foregrip, which helps with recoil stabilization, which is side to side, Merc, which is primarily vertical, and a little bit of the hip fire accuracy. Tactical foregrip we're going to be skipping because it's a worthless attachment. It really only helps with idle sway, and pretty much all the videos we've looked at so far, it literally does nothing for recoil, so I don't really want to spend too much time on that one. Ranger foregrip is going to help with recoil control and a little bit of aiming stability, which you get with the tactical foregrip, but like I said, it's not all that valuable. It just helps to slow down that idle sway, but in reality, we're only using this for recoil control. And then we have the operator foregrip, which is only recoil control. And as far as ADS penalties, Commando foregrip 0, Merc is 1 frame slower, Ranger 1 frame slower, Operator is 2 frames slower. Tactical, don't waste your attachment on that. We'll go ahead and move forward. Also, when it comes to mobility, the 50 round mag is going to give you a 3% movement speed, which is mostly negligible because this is an SMG. It moves pretty fast to begin with, and then is 1% slower for the 60 round mag, but the ADS penalties for both of these are still 1 frame. So in my opinion, I think it's worth getting the extra ammo. For rear grip, you have the stippled grip tape and the rubberized grip tape. The stippled grip tape is going to help you with aim down sight speed by about 1.5 frames, depending on the weapon. Mostly with this one, I usually get it right around 1 frame. And then sprint to fire speed is helpful with SMGs because a lot of times you're going to be in the hip fire, so getting the bullets out faster is always a huge advantage. So a lot of times stipple grip is a good way to go, and if you want even less recoil, you could go with the rubberized grip tape without an ADS penalty, and obviously it's going to hurt your idle sway, so it'll move a little bit faster, which really isn't a huge issue. So as far as the stock goes, we have the no stock option, which is going to help your ADS speed by about 2 frames. It's also going to help with your movement speed, usually right around 3 or 4%, and that comes at the penalty of recoil control. So you're definitely going to have more recoil, and it will be noticeable when you're using the no stock attachment, as we'll see from those recoil patterns. The FSS close quarters is a good alternative. It's going to give you 1 frame faster aim down sight time, so it ends up being very similar to the stippled grip tape, but the difference is you're not getting that additional sprint to fire speed, so it just ends up being a trade-off. I would try both and see what you prefer. And when it comes to laser, you can really go with whatever. It really depends on how you're going to use the weapon. If you decide to go with the tac laser, it will speed up your aim down sight time by 2 frames, but it will come at the cost of people being able to see your laser. So now let's go ahead and take a look at the different iron sights, the recoil patterns, and how this weapon performs at range. So for the most part, I don't really buy any of the blueprints in game, so the ones you're going to see are either part of the battle pass or completed through challenges. This is the base version of the MP7. If you go with the cataclysmic blueprint from season 2 battle pass, I believe you're going to have the exact same iron sights. They also had the Bengal version within the season 2 battle pass. If you kind of take off the optics from these things, it will give you a different looking iron sight. As you can see here, this is completely different, and it's a little bit more open right around the edge here. It's not quite as thick, blocking some of that view. Mostly negligible when it comes down to preference. And you can see the boot camp challenges, which is available to everyone. You can get the Piercer blueprint. I'm not sure if this is a multiplayer challenge or Warzone possible, but this is definitely a free option if you do have access to the challenge. So right here we have the base MP7, and the reason why I have 2 different recoil patterns is because even though we have predictive recoil, there is a slight randomness to the recoil patterns. Some of it I think is caused by just aiming instability, because it depends on where you fire in the idle sway. It's going to give it a little bit of a difference, but for the most part, you're going to get a very consistent recoil pattern. But I just do 2 as an example of that consistency. Right here we have the FSS Strike barrel, and you can see that it does help. It gives you a little more consistency, a little bit less side to side. It pretty much just goes straight up and to the side. It doesn't really do much effect other than that. And this one doesn't even have the bonus in there that is supposed to help you with recoil control, but you can see there is a slight benefit. If you go with the FSS Recon, it does have that recoil control, and you can see it's cutting down on the recoil and is definitely noticeable. Keeping in mind that these are taken around 20 to 25 meters. So keeping in mind that if you are further away, this recoil pattern would be stretched out quite a bit. Even though this is an SMG, it is one of the few SMGs that you could actually use as a primary weapon in combination with the sniper rifle or something like that. Let's go ahead and continue on. You can see the Commando foregrip. It does tighten it up quite a bit, but no more than just having the Recon. So I don't know if necessarily the Commando foregrip's necessarily worth it. I think if you combine it with the FSS Recon, that could be a good option. It just kind of depends on what your preferences are. You can see the Merc right here. I think one of the benefits of the Merc, in addition to that, it's going to help you with the hip fire, which, like I said, a lot of times you're going to be hip firing with SMGs because you're coming in and building, you're going to have faster movement while in the hip fire than actually aim down sight. So there's a huge advantage by being able to spray people and those bullets hit. In addition to that, you also have the Ranger foregrip, which looks comparable with the Merc, without that hip fire bonus. And then Operator seems like a complete waste because you're getting slower aim down sight time compared to these other 2. I'm not really seeing much going on there other than it is a consistent recoil pattern. I think one good option you could go with is if you want to go with the Recon with the Commando with the rubberized, since these 2 don't have penalties, you could actually still have a reasonable ADS speed just by the pure fact that this SMG has a very fast aim down sight anyways. And some people even suggested, hey, maybe you should do all these different combinations. With the number of attachments, I would have several slides of recoil patterns combining all the different combinations, because there's a lot of different combinations you can actually do with the different options of attachments. Next up is this no stock option. You can see it ends up shooting it off the door here, ends up shooting into the brick. So that is a very noticeable increase. And like I said, as you get further away, it ends up being a bigger penalty. So maybe for close quarters, if you're not going to use this as a primary, you're going to use it as a true secondary, or maybe you have a rifle as your primary, this could definitely be a good option. So you get the faster aim down sight time. Even though the penalty's there, most of your engagements are going to be close, so it's going to be a lot easier to manage. If you go with the class setup that I'm going to show up in today's video, this is the recoil pattern you get. You can see it's very tight all together, and you could probably get a lot of these types of tight recoil patterns with different various combinations of attachments. It's really more what you really want to try out. This just happens to be the class setup that I prefer. So right here, this is a bunch of lines that show the time to kill versus distance in meters, and this is for all of the SMGs. So if we look right here, we have the MP7, which is this little middle blue line. You can see that there's other ones that kill faster. The AUG 556 is kind of an anomaly because that's more of a rifle. An SMG with rifle, it kind of ends up being more in the rifle category when you do that, because as you can see, the AUG kind of drops off to being a terrible SMG if you don't use that 556 ammo. But if we're doing this comparison and then we want to simplify it a little bit so there's not as many lines, so I'm gonna move to a little bit more simplified one so you can kind of look at what's going on here. You can see the damage range for the SMG when it comes to the MP7, right around 12.5 meters. It has a damage drop off right around 12.5 to 15 meters, and then it drops off again at 20, and then again at 22, and then again at 27. It has multiple damage drop off. So it's kind of one of those things that this is why SMGs end up being penalized so much when you end up taking on range engagements, because you go from killing in maybe like 12 shots up to like 18. And that is not an exaggeration. There's some really high time to kills, especially if you're not getting headshots. So what you're really looking at here is how competitive is it at close range. I think overall it ends up being a good option. It ends up being a pretty decent SMG. All the way up to about 30 meters. It's very competitive, in line with a lot of the other SMGs, and it has very low recoil. MP5 is probably still going to win the head-to-head engagement up to right around 15 meters, 18 meters, somewhere in there, 20 meters. You're going to win the engagements, and then you could switch to the rifle. But it really just depends on how your class setup wants to be put together. If you want to focus on an SMG and a sniper combo, the MP7 is probably a better option than the MP5. And then if you want to just see how that compares to the two popular rifles in the game, which is the M4 and the Gfuel, you can see these different time to kills over here. You can see that there's pretty much almost no reason to use an MP7. So you can see right up to 15 meters, there's not really much use in ever using the MP7. It's time to kill, it just isn't fast enough compared to those two rifles, unless you're landing upper chest and headshots. So another thing to consider, how you want to use that weapon. And if you're going to use it as primary, just know that you are going to get outgunned 90% of your gunfights if somebody has an M4 or a Gfuel and you're rocking the MP7. Alrighty, so now let's go ahead and talk about the best class setup, or at least my best class setup. Obviously, you can make your own based off the information we've covered. I'm gonna end up going with the monolithic suppressor. The barrel, I'm gonna go with the FSS Recon for that recoil control. And the bullet velocity, damage range, all those bonuses are you getting out of this. 2-frame penalty, not a big deal. This is SMG. I'm usually going to start with the hip fire and then aim down sight. And then for my further engagements, I'm going to use a rifle. Next up, Underbarrel. I'm going to go with the Merc foregrip. Even though it was very even with the Ranger, Commando was pretty decent. I think having that extra hip fire accuracy is a huge bonus, even if it's a 1-frame penalty. When it comes to ammunition, I'm going to go with the 60-round mag, just because those extra 10 bullets allow you to down an additional player or thirst a player once they are downed, so they cannot be revived. And as far as the third attachment, it's really like a free-for-all of what you want to do. Personally, I go with the stipple grip tape because the sprint to fire speed in the hip fire department is a huge bonus in my opinion. If you don't really care about that part, you could always go with the close quarter stock. If you want faster mobility and ADS, you could go with the no stock. Just got to be able to handle that recoil and see how it meshes with your attachments. And then the laser is another good way to go. But a lot of times I can end up in a situation where I'm in a room, pre-aim in a doorway, knowing somebody's coming in, and I don't want the tac laser to give away my position. So a lot of times I avoid that on SMGs, where I'm primarily going to be pre-aiming a doorway. That's it. That's my class setup. Hopefully you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, please remember to hit that like button. And if you're brand new, looking to find your way back for more Call of Duty content, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Top of that, if you have another video you'd like to see besides the M13 in this type of video, make sure you comment that down below. Appreciate all the support on the channel. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.